morning. We can start with this session of Jacques Derrida chair. I'm very happy that this year it was possible to organize the Derrida chair again in presence of such a beautiful venue at Circolo dei lettori. The Jacques Derrida Law and Culture International Chair of Philosophy was instituted in Turin with the support of Compagnia di San Paolo and the University of Turin, with the aim of honoring the memory of one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century. The choice of this particular city was suggested by the fact that Derrida cultivated a long-lasting relation of friendship and professional collaboration with professor teaching at the University of Turin, which also conferred him a degree honoris causa in philosophy in 1998. The subtitle Law and Culture is tied to the fact that Derrida's late work much revolved around the link between philosophy and the general topic of law, culture, and justice, in accordance with the principle that justice is not deconstructible. Just to mention the scholar awarded during the past edition, I want to remember in 2014 Michel Viborca, 2015 Alessandra Donati, 2016 Massimo Cacciari, 2017 Interfilo, 2018 Bernard Stiegler, and 2019 Jolan Orban. This year's edition was conceived in collaboration with the Central Logic, Language and Cognition Center of the University of Turin, and as is theme in the relationship between natural intelligence and artificial intelligence. I would like to thank the director and the colleague of LLC, the collaboration board, for the collaboration board of the creative and organizational level.
Thank you, Tatiana. So,
It's your turn.
okay, so it's just to say that I'm really happy that we've been able to join forces this year to organize this traditional event of the Bond, the Laboratory of Ontology in Turin. The LLC, I'm here as the former director, actually. It's a research center with three departments associated. One of them is philosophy and education, and there is also psychology and computer science, so it's a perfect match, I think, in this case. Well, I just wanted to say, it seems like intelligence is a notion that looks really crucial for our, to handle, let's say, for our present and future. So when something like that happens, it's always sort of sensible to see, to explore whether the rich inbox of philosophical tradition, both across the historical spectrum and across the disciplinary spectrum, can provide insight, right? To provide tools for understanding. So that I think was the original intuition by Ciara Medina, Maurizio Tavares to set up this event, and I think it was a very compelling and challenging intuition. It's something that we need to do to understand our times and also ultimately to make decisions about our future. So I'm just saying, I'm looking forward to seeing a very rich and fruitful discussion and exchange with you today. And I thank again for the cooperation on all this.
Thank you. We can start. Parola sharing the session.
So, good morning and welcome again, everybody, to the first session of this Jacques Derrida. Our first speaker is José Hernandez-Orallo from the Universitat Politécnica de Valencia, and the title of his talk is Dissecting the Grail of General Intelligence, Visually the Generality of Natural and Artificial Intelligence. So, José Hernandez-Orallo, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. There's some kind of return, so but do you have any question? Probably you're not going to use the chat, just say it loudly, and even you can interrupt me at any time, but also we can also discuss at the end. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so first of all, apologies that I'm not there at the Palazzo Graneri della Roccia. I would like to be there, and from the camera perspective, it looks beautiful. And I have to say that I'm originally a computer scientist, but then I tried to turn into a philosopher, and I did my PhD in logic and philosophy of science department at a different university. But I've always had this struggle between the more technical research and these kind of philosophical questions have driven my research from the very beginning, or even from the moment I was a teenager. So I'm really pleased and I really appreciate and thank you for the invitation to be in this kind of discussion today. And the topic today about the general topic about artificial versus natural intelligence, because I think this is going to be a discussion that started last century. Well, it started before that, but it's going to be one of the key questions in this century. So what am I going to talk about today? So, well, the Grail of general intelligence. So I'm not going to talk about, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to talk about the Shroud of Turin. I'm going to talk about a different relic. It is not the Holy Grail that you have in Genoa. It is not the true Holy Grail. That's the real one that we have in Valencia. But I'm going to talk about the Holy Grail of general intelligence. So what's this? This is a term that was introduced by Robert Sternberg, one of the perhaps the most relevant researchers or scientists in the area of human intelligence and psychometrics in the 20th century. He's still active. He introduced this term as something like a quest for a discipline that was introduced in 1904 by Spearman. And it's still an open question, and it's been a heated debate for a century about whether this notion of general intelligence really exists. And of course, this kind of a de facto, what Spearman found, there's a kind of a correlation when humans do several tests, and when you typically perform well on some of these tests, you generally perform well on the others. This kind of correlation, that's a fact. But the interpretation is very different, and whether you should call that a general intelligence or there's some kind of a statistical thing behind all of that. So this has been around the science of intelligence, if you want to call it the science of intelligence, or more specifically psychometrics, or the area of evaluating intelligence, which of course is a debate in itself. But it has also pervaded artificial intelligence, and almost from its early days. And John McCarthy, one of the fathers of the discipline of AI, in 1971, in his Turing Award lecture, he focused the lecture on generality in artificial intelligence, and he said this is one of the open problems and things that we haven't been able to solve in AI. That was 1971. 50 years later, we still have that question. We don't know what generality is in AI, and of course, if we don't know what that is, it is very difficult to reproduce. And then it is also one of the puzzles. That's a term that Burkett and et al. Use in a recent piece in behavioral and brain sciences about the evolution of general intelligence, whether this notion of general intelligence is not only something that appears in humans, or people claim that there's something that is a trait of human intelligence, that is something that we want to reproduce in AI, but also that some other non-human animals, they also have this notion of general intelligence, and how this can be interpreted, and what the reasons are for evolution, whether it's kind of a convergent evolution that perhaps general intelligence had to appear. It's not something as contingent as we might think. Okay, so, but let's start from the beginning. And the beginning is this. And I'm sorry I'm not there just to see your faces, and maybe some of you are nodding. I know what this picture is about. If you don't know, this thing that you see, I don't know, you see my mouse, but this thing that this tiny dot that you see here, this is the pale blue dot. This is the pale blue dot photograph. This was taken by Voyager 1 that was, about maybe 50 years ago. Yeah, it was, not so many years, but well, it was, the interesting thing that this is just a picture of the Earth from about 6 billion kilometers away. And that gives us a real perspective of what we are, where we are. And I love this piece from Carl Sagan about that, this self-importance that we give to us as humans, our position in the universe. This is challenged by this pale light, this tiny dot there that represents the Earth in the universe. So the same thing, and I think we can understand this image because there was a Copernican revolution. There was a Copernican revolution in physics and in our understanding of the cosmos. But we are still working, and this is still work in progress. We're still working on a Copernican revolution about cognition, about intelligence. We still put humans in the center of the universe of cognition. And that's no longer the case if we take an evolutionary perspective. Just the Homo sapiens is just another kind of animal. But when we talk about intelligence and general intelligence, always humans are there, always in the middle, and then everything just turns around humans. And people especially in comparative psychology and animal cognition, they have tried to suggest that humans is just another species, and many people are what's different, what's specific, what's distinctive about human intelligence. And I don't like that kind of what's really what makes the difference between a chimpanzee and a human, bonobo and a human. I think that the interesting thing is just to place ourselves in this space. And it is going to be very helpful when we start doing experiments and we're doing artifacts in artificial intelligence. And that's in the tradition of cognitive science. That started in the 60s, 70s, with this notion of cognitive science, where we are going to see non-human intelligence, human intelligence, and artificial intelligence in the same space, and see where we are in this space and how we relate to all the other things that are already out there because of evolution, and all the things that we have created in AI, and all the things that we will create in AI. And this is an amazing question, this exploration of this space. And some people say, especially I have some students, not many computer science students, but some students in some other disciplines that say, oh, everything has been invented. Oh, it's a pity that we're in the 21st century. Just imagine the early days of the 20th century, or maybe the Middle Ages, that everything was there to be discovered. And I said, no. I think this is a great century. this is a century, we are going to explore a whole new universe of intelligence, and you're going to be there and you can explore that new universe. And I try to put this example, and this is taken from my 2017 book. Just imagine that you have this cleaner, and this machine is new to science. And as a scientist, yeah, you see this, there's a label on a cage, this machine is new to science. Inside the cage, there sits a small dashboard, this kind of cleaner. Well, it's a robot, but it has bad temper. What do you mean by that? No bad-tempered dashboard has ever been found. Nothing is known about this. It has no name. For the mechanist, it presents an immediate challenge. What has made it unique? How does it differ from the other dashboards already known and described? Are you familiar with this paragraph? And again, I'm sorry that I'm not there to see if someone is nodding and saying, oh, I know this. Well, this comes from Morris's The Naked Ape. I don't know if you know this book. It was very, very influential in the 70s. It was very influential for me when I was a teenager. And I said, oh, I'm just an ape. Probably I'm still an ape in many ways. All of us, we are apes. But just another ape. Well, it's only special because we are naked, because we don't have fur. But apart from that, we are not that special. And for me, that was kind of a revolution. It's not because at that time I didn't know what evolution was, but that's that kind of just looking at ourselves from that perspective was really illuminating. So the only thing they have done in this paragraph is just to replace machine. Machine replaces animal, dashboard replaces squirrel, bad temper replaces Blackfeet, and mechanist replaces zoology. So this perspective, this 6 billion kilometers perspective, I think that's the right perspective to understand cognition and to understand intelligence. So yeah, so we try to do this in a way. My focus has been on evaluation for many years, and about 4 years ago, I published a book, The Measure of All Minds, where from this perspective about measuring intelligence, I tried to map what we knew at the time, what we know today about this space of cognition, of this space of intelligence, and taking humans, non-human animals, and AI systems or artificial intelligence, or even collectives, as elements in this space, and how we would be able, or how we should evaluate these things. And the key thing is, and playing a little bit with this man is the measure of all thing, this kind of Protagoras statement, it's again with this Copernican vision that we are not the center of the universe. We shouldn't be the reference where everything should compare to. This is the key essence of the book, that just humans should be just evaluated as any other element in this space. I'm just going to strike just a couple of key things in the book, and then I will move to the main topic, which is generality today. But one way of understanding the debate about intelligence is this tension between very specific systems that do cognition, but at a very specific level, and some kind of systems that do a more general cognition. How we can really move from one edge or one extreme to the other extreme. On one extreme, we have specific systems. Then and people who argue, oh, no, intelligence doesn't even exist. That's a subjective phenomenon. There's this in computer science, or we know this no free lunch theorem, no machine learning system can be better than the rest, with kind of a very strong assumptions. But well, some people follow these things. You also have this theory of multiple intelligences. Oh, sorry, your child is not good at mathematics, but there will be something she's good at or he's good at. This kind of, that goes very well, because when you talk about the G factor and things like that, people say, oh, this is, and there has been a lot of discussion, of course, a lot of bad use about the term. I think that's this notion of general intelligence, saying that that subject A is more intelligent than subject B. That's even unethical in a way. So yeah, I'm sympathetic to this. Okay, we are diverse. We have every single human has their abilities, but that's a wish more than perhaps what we really find in the end. But this is this kind of school about intelligence, this kind of a general intelligence that doesn't exist. And actually we have different capabilities, not even general capability. We have many narrow capabilities or multiple intelligence, and each person is different, and you have to find their profile. On the other extreme, we have intelligence as a convergent phenomenon. We have seen it in different branches of evolution, not only in apes. We have found, whenever we do experiments with humans, this notion that is called the positive manifold, this kind of correlation between the results of the tests. So this idea that you can be very good at something and very bad at some other things, of course that's true. And for instance, I'm very bad at music. I don't know what I'm good at, but I know that I'm very bad at music. Maybe I'm good at some other things, I don't know. But in the end, many things are correlated. Well, that depends on whether you consider music as one of the key capabilities, or it is. But this discussion about the G factor and the capital G factor, which is about species rather than individuals, and things such as Solomon prediction, and even in artificial intelligence, this notion of AGI, this notion of artificial general intelligence, these have been the two extremes. And when we put the problem in terms of two extremes, probably you say, okay, maybe the virtue is in the middle, or maybe we should explore this range of things, or maybe we should try to measure whether a system is more on this side or is more on this other side. And at the moment, humans are typically associated with general intelligence. We find this strong correlation. With non-human animals, we have a little bit of everything. So there are animals that, of course, they are very specific. They're very good at some particular tasks that even humans are not very good. But then they're hopeless on many other tasks, and they would never learn some other tasks. And then you have AI systems, or the old AI systems that were very specific on solving something. For instance, they can be very good. You have a translation system. That system is very good at translation, and at the moment they are relatively good. But of course, the system is not able to do anything else. So it's very specific for a task. And even translation is quite a general, complex task. But you can think of more specific tasks where AI systems are much better than humans, but just for that particular task. So typically, we have this profile where with these peaks. So the system is good at a few tasks, but then completely useless at many other tasks. But with humans, we have that humans can adapt or can learn many different tasks. Okay? So this is a little bit the one way of looking in a dimension between specific and general. So the thing is, okay, general, what does it mean to be general? We're talking about A, B, C, D, many tasks. How many tasks can we have? Well, the answer is that there are infinitely many tasks that you could find in the physical world, or even abstractly, or in applications in AI. The set is infinite, the set of tasks. So in the end, when you talk about performance for this set of tasks, you have to say, okay, so what are the tasks that are more likely and what are the tasks that are less likely to appear? And that's a little bit what happens in the environment of an animal. So some tasks are going to appear, but some others won't appear in the life of an animal. So if the range of tasks is limited, the animal or the species can specialize for these tasks, and then you find very specialized animals. But if there's a lot of variability because of co-evolution or social environments, and that's one of the key things that has been stated as one of the reasons why humans have this general intelligence, because social invariants made things so changing all the time that we need to adapt. We need to adapt to different tasks anytime. See, we compare the tasks that we are doing every single day today. They have nothing to do with the tasks that our ancestors had to do 2,000 years ago. Well, some of them, well, we have to eat, we have to move around, but many other tasks, they didn't exist. So when we think about generality, being able to solve many tasks, so you need to, okay, you have a kind of a metric of performance for the task, and then this pi and mu is the task, pi is the agent, or the system, or the animal, or the human. You have a result, but then you have infinitely many tasks here, and you have a probability for each of the tasks. It is only when you clarify this probability that you can really talk about some kind of measure of performance, overall performance on the task that you are going to face in your life. So even this notion of what is a good system, or a system that you want to relate intelligence with kind of success in life, you need to determine what kind of task you're going to face in your life, because maybe you're lucky and you live in a nice world, and the tasks that you find are easy and you're very successful, but just because your environment was easy, because your distribution of tasks was very easy. So but even if using some formulas from time to time, I think that they are very useful to understand this and to move a little bit from just the abstract description and get a little more detail. But I will skip some of them. Don't worry about that, because it's going to get a little bit more ugly. So the question is general intelligence, or even intelligence, just a subjective phenomenon that depends on your choice of the set of tasks and the distribution that you put? Some tasks are going to be more likely for an animal and for another, but this animal is very intelligent because it succeeds. Well, I would argue against that, and I'm going to argue a little bit about that. Okay, so that's something that has been around for quite a while, and a few years ago, I tried to consider all possible tasks. Is that definable, formally definable? It can be defined, and these all computable tasks, you can do that. And then you say, oh, what kind of probability are you going to give to an infinite set? And of course, you cannot give a uniform distribution to an infinite set, because then you have zero probability. But you can use something different. You can give more probability to those, in this case, to those patterns that are simpler. So it's kind of Occam's razor in a way. And if you do that, you get something very similar when you try to generate tasks. And the complexity that you get, all of these comes from these equations, nothing to do with the results about humans originally or a priori. And then you get these kinds of sequences, and you probably you see in some IQ tests or some psychometric tests. And basically what you get is that the result, when you apply these to humans, the result is the performance goes down as the complexity of the sequences increases. So those are kind of, this is interesting. This is kind of a relation. Don't read too much into this, but some people did. And there was this kind of very influential paper, Leg and Hutter, in 2007. And it was very influential for me, but I'm very grateful because I forgot about all the things that I did with my PhD. And then in 2007, maybe this is not that rubbish because these people are using this. And they tried to extend the idea for interactive settings where you had an agent with actions and rewards and observations, more likely not just sequences of letters, but something like a real environment. And they put a distribution on all possible environments, which is nice because it's a better way of describing a task than just a sequence of letters. So here you have all possible environments or tasks that an agent could face, all computable environments that you can describe. And then again, you give kind of these Occam's razor distribution to all of them. So simpler environments are more likely. And then you get some kind of a nice measure So it's exactly the same equation. The only thing that you change is the definition of what a task is and the probability, definition of probability, and they called it universal intelligence. So you don't know, this was very influential in AGI, in artificial general intelligence. Actually, Shen Liang, he's one of the co-founders of DeepMind. So still Polish Shane is no longer working on these things because he has high ambitions today with DeepMind. But it's important just to see a little bit of the history of, especially this definition and the history of artificial general intelligence and the relation to this definition. But this definition has many problems, many problems, especially because you put a lot of probability to very simple environments. So in a way, this measure is relative. It's more like a meta measure rather than an actual measure of intelligence. And the main problem is that tasks and policies are not the same thing. For the C-test, they were the same thing, but for environments, they are not the same thing. So one thing is the problem, that's the task, and another thing is the solution, that's the policy. The policy of the agent. That's a technical term that we use in reinforcement learning, the policy, or in economics, the policy of the agent. But that's the solution that the agent has to find. Okay, so when you separate the problem with the solution, you say, okay, I'm interested in the difficulty or the complexity of the solution, not the complexity of the task itself. Then you can get, again, you can analyze all of these environments by their difficulty, the complexity of the solutions, and you get, again, these nice curves where the result or the response or the performance of the agents, they decrease as the complexity of the solution increases, as you would expect. But if you do that, then you can have different tasks and or groups of tasks, and in a way you can make them commensurate to this complexity, and take a set of tasks, just score their performance of the system on all of these tasks. You can just convert this radial plot into a parallel plot, aggregate, and you get this, which is exactly this thing here. So basically what you see is that with this plot, we can in a way summarize how well the system performs for a range of tasks. Without going into detail about if there are millions of tasks, you don't have to do this kind of radial plot. So I'm going to skip this a little bit, but the interesting thing is that you can redefine some of these equations and consider that you can define intelligence for a range of difficulties and a diversity of solutions. And that's closer to the original idea of general intelligence. You want not only to cover just very simple cases, you want to cover that, and you can even do that uniformly, because that's a moment that above some difficulty, your performance is going to be 0. And then you can even be uniform on the diversity of solutions. So in a way, you can define a measure where you cover a range of difficulties, and you encourage diversity in these problems. And it's not how many tasks you're able to solve, but what's the diversity of these tasks. And that's what makes more sense in terms of generality. Okay, so so the question is, imagine that we use these equations in this way. So how would you maximize if this is our representation on the right, and we want to maximize the area? So a system A is better than a system B. It is going to be more successful on a higher number of tasks or diverse tasks. How are we going to do that? So that's relatively easy when we think in terms of these curves. And this can be done by evolution, by AI, or by science itself. And now, given all of this introduction, I think it's much easier to say that if you give this definition, general intelligence is associated with competence for a wide range of cognitive tasks. That doesn't make sense. Why? It doesn't make sense. If you look for the definition of general intelligence or generality, you're going to find this. Even AGI, even intelligence, you're going to find this definition. But this is completely wrong. Why? Because it depends on the task you're choosing and the difficulty of those tasks. You cannot solve all possible tasks. There are tasks that are very, very difficult, and they even are tasks that are not solvable. So you need to determine what kind of probability you're going to use for these tasks if you want to talk about generality. So the change is that any system with limited resources cannot show competence for a wide range of cognitive tasks independently of that difficulty. So what you would expect is that the general system will succeed on many of the simple tasks and start failing as the tasks get a little more complicated. But this idea that you can solve millions of tasks from very simple difficulty or high difficulty, and maybe you are completely hopeless on some other different tasks that are very easy, that's not for me a good notion of intelligence, general intelligence. So let's have a look at an example. So in this example, we have 2 agents, 6 tasks, and you get these numbers. And you look, this pi b, this is very bad on task 5 and 6. Oh, so this agent is not very general. Even if they have the same mean, the variance is much higher. So this is more regular. So because pi a is more regular, I could even say that pi a is more general. But just what's mu1, mu2? We have to look into that. So imagine that these are tasks that include many instances, or 4 instances, and some of them are more difficult than others. If they are more difficult than others, what you would expect that the system that is very general would do all of the simple ones, independently of the domain. So you cover a wide range of tasks. If they are simple, you give me very complicated tasks, of course I'm going to fail on some of them. So this agent is very good in all domains when the tasks or when the instances are simple. And when the instances are difficult, then it fails. So same result, but now you probably say, oh, I'm not that sure that perhaps pi a is the most general agent. Maybe pi b is more general, because when I give the system a simple task on any domain, it succeeds. So it is very general at the low level, and that's okay. It's like having an assistant, and this assistant can do a lot of things if they are easy. It's very general, maybe not very capable, but very general. So you start thinking that perhaps we need to distinguish, we need to dissect, and that's why this word is on the title of the talk today. We need to dissect this idea of capability and generality, so kind of a little like depth and breadth. And of course, this has been around in psychometrics and some other areas. But can we do this a little bit more formally? So if we look at the curves, actually it is very simple. Capability is just the area, and generality is just the slope of these curves. It is very, very simple to see if you understand generality this way. Of course, you can give the formulas, and I'm going to skip this. But basically, generality is the slope of the curve. But the good thing is that because of these formulas, you don't even need to have a continuous curve. It's just you analyze the points and you get the result. But actually, it is very similar to the slope. If that would be kind of a perfect sigmoid, that would be more or less the same as this slope of the curve. And the capability is the area. So of course you want more capability, but then you can ask questions about, is generality good for having more capability, or is it at odds evolutionarily or in terms of AI? So basically what we are doing is that for this kind of thing, we get this kind of plot and we have very low generality. And for this kind of thing, we have this plot and we have high generality. But of course, capability is another metric that we have there, and it depends on the area that you have. Okay, so this area maybe is comparable to this area, so the capabilities are not that different. Or maybe this and these are not that different, but in terms of generality, there's a big difference. This is very good. Actually, this agent on the right is able to solve any task or any domain up to a level of complexity. And from that level of complexity, then the system starts to fail, as you would expect, as humans start to fail when things get a little bit more difficult. So we have applied these things in a recent paper with humans, non-human animals, and AI systems. I'm going to be a little bit faster on this, but this is in a recent paper you're interested. So we move from the G factor to this notion of generality. And this is just one of the tasks that we use, or the domains that we use. It's kind of a particular maze. But the interesting thing is that each point that you see here is one human, these 496 humans. So each point here is a human. So there's no interest in looking, but this is capability on one axis, and this is spread, which is kind of an inverse of generality. So the further down, the more general the agent is. So you have some agents that are not very capable, but they are very general. And then you have some other agents that are very capable, but not that general. So in a way, you can disentangle at the individual level, you can disentangle generality from capability. And that's really interesting because it's not a populational notion anymore. It doesn't depend on the population. This agent is going to be there independently on where all the other agents are. And this is not something that you can get from the G factor and all of that. This is, everything is population. Change the population and your points will change location. So we do that with humans. We analyze that with some animals, and we do that with some AI systems. And the interesting thing is, if we want more generality in AI, what we need to do is to move this curve to the right, of course, but not to make it flatter, but to make it more steep. Okay, so we have applied that, and maybe this is a summary. We applied these notions of individual generality and compare the results for each individual with their capability, which is the area, the overall performance in a way, for different kinds of subjects and different kinds of tasks. And in the end, we get some kind of these nice plots for each of the scenario. And we can even say, oh, this element here is not very capable, but very general, this one. And you can even try to understand why this system is general, but not capable, or what this is capable, but not general. And this, again, especially in these cases, is independent of the population. So add more animals, more humans to the plot, and the other plots don't move. And this is really interesting. That's something that whenever you change the population in psychometry, your results are going to change. Well, so you get all of these plots, nice plots, and you can locate each individual, and you can do this for humans, for animals, or even for species. You can also apply that for groups you can aggregate. So that's no problem about that. The interesting thing, when we look at the global picture, is that the mean generality that we get for all these groups is relatively high. In some cases, it's a little bit lower, for instance, for the tasks that we're considering, and the correlation between generality and capability is more usually positive than negative. Sometimes it's very low. And that's interesting because in a way we have disentangled generality from capability. So it's, well, in some cases it is very correlated, but in general it's not very correlated. But the interesting thing is, at least it is not negatively correlated, because that's exactly what Spearman formulated about 100 years ago, and this is known as Spearman's law of diminishing return. So as the G factor, as the capability of the population increases, the generality of the G factor went down. And that was something that has been criticized many times, and I think it's a nice statistical artifact. But with this metric, you don't have that problem anymore. You can analyze these things in a different way. And then what we find that there's no Spearman's law of diminishing return in the data. We don't find that. If we find that, it's kind of a slight positive correlation rather than a negative correlation. So perhaps generality is good and not bad. So summarizing, so that we can have some time for a few questions. Generality is universal in a way that we are going to find it in different systems, but generality is not a yes or no. It's something that we should try to measure. And I'm not claiming that this metric that we present in this paper is going to be the final metric for generality, and everybody should use that metric. What I'm just saying is that we should measure things, and we shouldn't start talking about. And the G factor, of course, was kind of an introduction trying to analyze this problem, but it's a populational indicator. So for humans, when you have a standard human population, it says something. When you have a species and you take animals from that species, it says something. But for instance, in AI, it's not going to say, it's not going to tell us much, because there's no such a thing as a population of AI systems. Nothing like that. Okay, so to really provide a whole Grail, and again, is Sternberg playing with the words, not me. So to provide the whole Grail of general intelligence, what I suggest, we have to break general intelligence into two things. One thing is generality, properly measuring it, and the other one is capability, which is kind of overall performance for the task that you're considering. When you do these two things, then you start understanding that one way of looking at this space of possible intelligences is in terms of capability and generality. And of course, you could try to map animals in this space. And AI at the moment is at a very specific range of systems. You can find different AI systems here, and they're typically here, not very capable, not very general. But you can also see some AI systems that are very capable, but very narrow. And we can measure that thing, and we can put these points here. And of course, we are happy by saying that humans are around here, high capability, high generality, but that, of course, is going to be challenged in the future by AI. And I'm pretty sure in this century, we are going to have systems that not only are more capable, as we are seeing already, but they are also more general than humans. And humans are not universally general or the maximum of generality. Maybe we can build systems that are more general than humans. And that would be interesting to see, because humans, we have a lot of limitations because of our brains and our biology in terms of the things that we can do, but not in terms of difficulty, but in terms of breadth. I'm going to leave it here because we don't have time. But well, if you're interested in some other initiatives or things that I'm doing a little more practical projects. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Please, can you come to the end of your talk so that we have time?
Yeah, finish. Yeah, I'm done. Yeah. So I stop sharing.
Okay, so thank you very much for your impressive talk. Now we have time for a couple of questions. We can start with Fabrizio Calzavarini. We can also change the cap of the microphone for each question, so please keep your mask.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Very interesting talk. I got a general question on the line of the talk. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's better. Okay. So I try to make the question. So you presented in one of the first slides the is a situation in which artificial intelligence is very narrow, so it's very capable but not general. And I'm wondering if one of the reasons behind this is that we are not searching anymore in artificial intelligence for cognitive plausibility. So I'm thinking here first in a translation machine. So at the beginning, there was this idea to model language in a way that is plausible from a cognitive point of view. So because syntax and semantics and so on. And now this translation machine, as far as I know, they are just purely statistical objects. So they have no plausibility at all from a biological point. So is it your idea that in order to reach the generality, the real generality in artificial intelligence, we also look for cognitive plausibility, or these two lines of research are separated? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that, for instance, it was yesterday, the day before yesterday, and Gary Marcus gave a talk, and he's one of the AI contrarians, and he says, okay, deep learning is working very well, and we are in one of the summers of AI, but deep learning is not sufficient, he claims, and some others agree with him that it's not going to be sufficient, even if it scales with more power, more data in the future, just to capture some of the things that you have when you take a cognitive approach. And of course, the way that, for instance, language models, I don't know if you have heard of large language models, these models that are able to do different things, but how brittle they are and how poor they are, especially on reasoning, which was a strong part of AI in the 70s and 80s. And now it's the weakest part of, so as in other disciplines, you see all of these all these ways left and right in terms of reasoning was good in AI, but perception was so poor in the 80s, 90s, and now perception is so good, but reasoning is so poor in that. And one of the reasons is that all the cognitive traditions has been lost. I think that in the future, we will need to reconcile these two things. And that's probably the most difficult part of the history of AI, reconciling the more cognitive oriented, even sometimes reasoning oriented view of the mind with that more like perception oriented or even more basic oriented. And that's a little bit one of the key questions for this century, trying to see what you are able to do without this extra level of reasoning and cognition, or even, and I think that perhaps the answer is cognitive as well, because we can understand what animals are able to do cognitively. But if you try to use associative models, there's a limitation on what you can explain about these systems. So yeah, I totally agree. I think that, and even people so you know that in AI, you have a lot of young people doing a lot of things without really knowing anything about cognition. And they do things and they work, but that will have to change in the future. Yeah, so I totally agree.
Thank you very much. Now there is a question from Anna Marmodoro.
Thank you. I wanted to ask how you define capability, and I wanted to argue that there are no general capabilities. So the generality of the general capability of a system is a set of specific capabilities, and that is because of how capabilities are defined, unless you have different definitions to provide.
Yeah, I didn't hear the question well. So the distinction between specific capabilities and general capabilities, that was the question? No. Can you please?
You didn't hear my question.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Because the sound is not very good. From the table, it's kind of okay, but at the
those having questions come directly to the desk here.
Hi, Isa. I just wanted to ask how you define capability, and I want to argue that you do not define capability as a general one. So anytime a system is generally capable, it has to be because it has a set of specific capabilities.
Okay. Okay. So yeah. So you're asking whether we can define generality as the conjunction of many specific capabilities.
Yes.
Yeah. And the question is, the problem about that is that you could do that. So in the end, if a system is good at many things, and you don't open the black box, and you say, oh, it works because it has high modularity and it has this thing for that, this thing for this other thing. But in the end, globally, the system is able to do a lot of things. From the measurement perspective, we don't really care. But the question is that as you make the set of tasks larger, there are going to be synergies between these tasks. And in the end, and that's a question for evolution, whether this kind of sharing components in the mind or in the brain or structures is something that appears convergently in evolution, or is something that could have been avoided altogether. And it's just something that we find that perhaps this plasticity in the brain is just a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence. I think that because when you extend the range of tasks in AI, in evolution, there are some things that are shared because these kind of abstract things are useful for many things. And then the brain evolves in that way. So some structures are useful for many tasks. You introduce learning as one of the things that happens, not one of the first things that happens in evolution, but one of the things that happens in cognition, this kind of introduction of learning, which allows you with the same hardware to cover a wide range of tasks. But depending on many other conditions, sometimes your brain is going to be organized in a more modular way or in a less modular way. At the moment, for instance, it is a very interesting question because all the cognitive, related to the previous questions in AI, all the cognitive architectures that were popular in the 70s, 80s, and they're still popular, they were a little bit modular. This part was for this was for reasoning, this part was for perception, and they put all the pieces together and they had an agent. But now we have this kind of a deep learning, blank slate, a lot of weights, and you give it a lot of data and you get something that does something, but no modularity at all. And it works. The thing is that it works, but how efficient they are, that's another question. So I think that there's a very, from the perspective of measurement, I think that you shouldn't make the distinction about how this is organized internally. Of course, with very precisely defined experiments, you are going to guess a bit. So that's no need to open the box always to understand what's going on. But in terms of measurement, I don't see that you have to make that distinction of how it is implemented.
Just a very quick follow-up. I don't think if you distinguish the specific capabilities of the system to open the box, I think the box remains black. I'll try to argue that might make us next. But it's not just, it's not just identifying the capabilities that opens the box. It's how the capabilities operate that makes it be a black box. But we talk.
Okay, yeah, sure, we will have time after your talk to discuss about this. There is a very last question by Filippo Santoni. Please come here.
Yeah, hi, thanks for a fascinating talk. I have a lot of questions. That's the kind of question you would ask in a coffee break. Unfortunately, you're not here for the coffee break. Anyway, I will stick to one. So collective intelligence in humans. So things that individuals cannot do on their own, but they can do when they are organized in a collective, things like political communities setting goals for the future, or being able to achieve certain tasks that they wouldn't be able to achieve as individuals. Is this covered in your studies somehow, or how does this fit with your idea of generality, population, etc.? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And that's a very good question because we know from evidence that collective intelligence sometimes kind of excels when you have a diversity in the group. So that's a little bit at odds with generality. If all of us are equally general, what's the point of working together? And of course, that's a little bit, well, I wouldn't call civilization, but the division of labor, for instance, works. So we basically, we are born general, and education tries to specialize us. And then as a group, we can do much greater things that if all of us were just given the same education and the same specialization. But I think that it's precisely when we see this education perspective and culture and everything that we really understand that humans are born general, and it is after learning that we specialize them, and as a group they work well. But of course, you can argue that in some kind of innate capabilities or differences between humans that even with or without education, you are going to use in a group. So you want a member of the team that is of this kind and another member of the team, and that works well. So that's why I think that the notion of general intelligence, humans are generally intelligent. Well, can we talk about degrees? Can we just map the capabilities or even the personality traits of all the humans that you put in the team, and then see whether collectively they are going to be better, and also try to understand the profile of the collective as well as a result. And yeah, I think that the analysis of collective intelligence, and there was a paper about 10 years ago or about the C factor, and it was kind of interesting, and what kind of elements you should put in a team just to get better results on these tests, when the test was performed by the collective and not by the individuals.
Okay. So thank you very much for the discussion. And
thank you very much.
our next speaker is Anna Marmodoro from Durham University, and the title of her talk is Designing Black Boxes in Artificial Intelligence.
Okay, thank you everybody. Thank you particular Maurizio for having me here, for stimulating me to think about topics that are relatively new for me. So I'm presenting some new work today which connects my interest in metaphysics and some new ideas related to artificial intelligence. And as you will see, there are connections between my talk and the one of your exams. So I'm sorry the PowerPoint is giving us trouble. I hope it's worth it. I hope people from the back can see the slide. What I want to talk about is something that is called in the literature black boxes in artificial intelligence. And I want to start by saying what I mean by black box, if okay. A black box, I take it here to be a domain of reality which we cannot explore epistemologically. So it's something where we cannot go into epistemologically. So if we can't, we cannot comprehend it, explain it, understand it, and so on and so forth. And of course, as soon as we think about black boxes, the common sense reaction is that we don't like them. We don't like to think that reality has these domains that are epistemically inaccessible to us. But what I want to discuss with you today is the fact that not only there are black boxes in nature, but we design black boxes ourselves in the domain of artificial intelligence, and arguably we design black boxes that are going to be impactful on our lives and even may end up governing our lives. So it's very important for us to try to understand, I think, at least what places us in this predicament, and then I think I leave it to my colleagues who have more interest in ethical matters, whether this is a good or bad thing. But I'm going to play here just the metaphysician, as it were, and just talk about what places us in this position where not only we have to live with black boxes in nature, but we even design black boxes ourselves, even if intuitively this is something we do not like or we do not want. So I want to start by talking about black boxes in nature. I want to start by introducing a concept that is that of powers, disposition, capacities. We heard it in the previous talk as capabilities. All these terms, although they're obviously there are nuances in their meaning, I think here are treated as synonymous. So by powers, dispositions, capacities, or capabilities, I want to refer here to something that many metaphysicians, if not even all metaphysicians today, find useful in order to give modal causal explanations of reality, both in the physical and in the mental domain. So we talk about physical powers like magnetism, for example, but we also talk about mental capabilities. Even the capacity for cognition is a type of power. And as I say, many metaphysicians today find really useful to appeal to this kind of building block of reality because it allows us to deliver explanations of model causal phenomena. But this is also in sync with modern science. Scientists too talk about powers, physical powers, forces. And that is no news. I mean, even Heisenberg talks about potential, for example. So there is this general trend in current science and current metaphysics that powers are a good thing. They help us to deliver explanations as long as at least we're not Humeans or neo-Humeans. And so powers are, what are they? Well, they are entities that in the ontology which have a special feature. They can exist as inactive, so doing nothing, like a magnet that doesn't attract anything, or active. And when they are active, what they do is to bring about change. So a magnet that is actively attracting something causes a change in the world, moves some metal next to it. So there is a connection between this special feature of powers, namely the fact that they exist either inactive or active, and the fact that they can explain change in the world. And if they explain change, they're useful to explain possession. And on this basis, we use powers to explain the world. But I think as soon as we introduce powers to deliver explanations, we also raise a challenge for ourselves, which is what is it that powers up powers? So, you know, if it is true of powers that the special feature is that they can exist inactive or active, then my puzzle is, what is it? How is it that powers go from being inactive to being active and therefore bring back change? And whatever it is that explains this transition from an inactive power to be dynamic entities that explain change. So we want to know what is it that makes powers do what they do, but as I argued elsewhere, this is precisely a limit to what we can do. We cannot explain, metaphysicians cannot explain, and scientists do not care to explain how powers transition from being inactive to being active. And this means that when we accept powers, physical powers or mental powers as building blocks of our explanations of the world, we basically accept that there are black boxes in nature. We accept that there are these entities that bring about change, but we cannot explain how they go from being inactive to being active, and therefore how they can bring about change in the world. And what metaphysicians do in practice is to build primitively into the definition of powers the fact that they bring about change. So they create a package, you know, powers are this package. They are dynamic entities, primitively dynamic entities that bring about change. So typically, I don't know if people in the back can see the PowerPoint, but the typical definition of powers is this: a type of power is essentially defined by the type of change that it brings about in certain circumstances. So you see, power, change, they're essentially connected. But how does the power bring about this change by going from inactive to inactive? Well, we don't know. And nevertheless, we have powers in our ontologies and in our science. Never mind how powers do what they do. So by doing that, as I say, we do accept black boxes, and by accepting black boxes, at least in the physical world, we basically accept that there is a limit to our understanding of the world. You know, we explain some things by positing some primitives, some rules, some rule facts in our metaphysics, and that's how it is. So why do we still believe in powers if they do explain, but they also introduce primitiveness or mystery in our explanations of the world? Well, my argument is that they're still useful. Even if we cannot explain how they go from inactive to active, we can see how they behave. We see their manifestations. We see that magnet attracts. So that attraction, which is the change brought about by the power, is something that we observe, measure, we define as essentially defining the power, and then this allows us to make predictions. So every time there is something that is magnetic, we can expect that it's going to do a certain thing, namely attract metal. So there is predictive utility, I think, in positive power. So though we posit something that basically is a black box, we can use it in ways that are useful to us. And that is good for science, because science likes predictions. So I want to say that if you follow me this reasoning, we find ourselves in a kind of position that I call here a powerful view of reality, according to which, metaphysically speaking, we endorse a realism about power, so we think powers exist, and we posit them in our ontology because they're dynamic entities that explain change, but we also remain primitivist about their nature. So, you know, we just say primitively entities do, and you can look at so it's not about to be get some benefits from the view that is really powers, and this is good, it is good, and many metaphysicians think that fine, you know, and even scientists fine. We cannot say what powers are, but we can predict whatever something will do if it has certain powers. You can think about gravitational forces, elastic forces, electric potential, all this kind of stuff. And once we have them, you know, explanations of the world, and more than that, we can even derive laws of nature from positing this kind of power. And this direction, so then we go from powers to laws of nature. Laws of nature are good, science likes them. There is a further feature of powers that I want to introduce just to explain why in powers we trust, and that is powers are, as I say, type of entities. Sorry. Okay, sorry. There are entities that manifest in a certain way in certain circumstances. So if I drop a glass here, it will break. It will necessarily break given the nature of the power and given the conditions in which the power finds itself. So there is this sort of conditional necessity that governs the manifestation of powers, and that's why the predictions that we can do based on powers are useful ones. Now, this is a controversial point in power ontology. I here disagree with other colleagues of mine, but I think we really need to think of this element that powers manifest by conditional necessity if we want them to be useful. I'm happy to go back in discussion time as to why I think this and why other people don't think that. But you know, if you follow me in all this thinking, then I think we have some sort of justified scientific trust in powers. It makes sense to have them. Sorry, this is not coming through very well as a PowerPoint, but what I want to do next is consider whether there are powers also in the field of artificial intelligence, whether there are black boxes, and what that means for us. So my next section is about the powers of AI. To get there, I need to just take you through one more step in metaphysics. So though there are entities in the ontology that are fundamental, there are also, you know, if we admit emergence from a base of certain entities, we can expect that some new entities will emerge, which are novel in relation to the base. So this happens in the case of powers too. From a certain set of powers, we can compose them, or they get composed in nature, and from them new ones emerge. These are novel powers. So, you know, well, this microphone, for example, you know, is kind of, it has novel powers that derive from the arrangement of some more basic ones. So what I'm saying here is that of powers, we can think there are some basic ones and some less basic ones, derivative ones, functional ones, artificial ones, because they derive from maybe our own arrangement of the natural ones. And the point I want to make here is that the fact that these powers are emergent means that they, as powers, are going to be as black boxes as the basic ones, but as the basic ones are also going to be predictable in their behavior. So like when we built this microphone, you know, we know what's going to do when we put powers together, and that's why we built it this way. So it's the same reasoning, basically. I'm saying as much as there are black boxes in nature when we posit the physical powers, when we go a level up to artificial powers, we get the same situation. We have a black box situation, but that allows prediction. And in fact, we use this predictability of powers just to build artificial stuff like this microphone. So I want to say that I want to call these emergent powers, let's say functional or artificial dispositions, just to give them a name. And I want to contrast the different kinds of artificial powers. So I have an example here, which is a bit like, you may think it's not the best example, but think of it's about bombs, okay? So I think, bombs are entities that we construct with certain artificial dispositions to go off and explode. And I want to say that although they go off and explode, and so they sort of manifest certain capacity, they're not epistemically opaque to us because we're built it that way. We can understand how we work, we design them, we can interfere with their behavior, we can even stop the bomb from exploding. But not all powers are that at the level of functional artificial dispositions. So there are algorithms, and I think we can think of algorithms as also a level up, namely powers that derive from the arrangement of composition of more simple physical ones. And at least initially, generation 1 algorithms were designed by us, operated fully by us, and they were, I think, a bit like my bomb example. So we knew what we were doing, we could interfere with what we do, we could control them as it were. But of course, artificial intelligence has not stayed at the level of developing algorithms. We know that there are examples now, and they're relatively common machine learning algorithms that are used in society and science. And here I just give you an example. This one, it's about recognizing cars, and these machine learning algorithms like these are relatively speaking, simple. They are explicitly programmed by us step by step to do what they do. So I think they're still on a slippery slope, a little, predictable by us. We understand them to some degree, but they still do things in ways we don't understand them. So I think they are, when we don't understand them, it's because they are in practice not understandable by us, but in principle they can. And then complexity increases. So are there artificial algorithms that are worse black boxes to us than the natural ones, and then the simpler artificial ones, and what does that mean for us? That's what I want to ask. So to answer the question I'm raising, I just want to take a moment to reflect on what we mean by understanding. And this is beginning to be very crucial. And obviously a lot more could be said, but I want to make the claim that understanding is about classifying things in the world in a certain way. So understanding the world is being able to say this is this, and this and these are in the same category, and this and that are in different categories, and so on and so forth. So I think classification is just a key point for our comprehension of the world when we humans try to understand it. Now, what do artificial systems do when they think about the world? Well, in a sense, they too operate through generating classifications, like you've seen in my car detecting algorithm. It's trying to, the system is trying to classify this is a car and this is not a car, and these two things are both cars, and so on and so forth. So the general claim I want to make here is that to some degree, artificial intelligence systems operate like us through creating classifications. And then the question is, does this make them closer to us or further away from us? More of a black box or less of a black box, or like all the other black box we have? Of course, it's a matter of complexity, so we go to deep learning. I'm not going to say very much about it, partly I'm really because I'm not an expert in this matter, but I think it's intuitive to everybody that we get to further complexity. We get the so-called hidden layers, which are further classifications, that new concepts that are used by these systems to understand the world. And then the system gets more and more fixed. Here I'm using a quotation from Marmodoro. We get to a mind-boggling complexity where there is trillions of parameters in place. And now we get puzzled because the artificial system that has the capacity to deal with this complexity, it's reasonably really effective. It's is this making it be a worse black box than any of the ones we have seen so far? Well, and this is a debate. So it's interestingly, there is literature. For example, this paper from MIT, I'm quoting that titled "Looking into Black Box," the black box of deep learning networks. Can we? And persons discussing this issue in the paper say no, because there are really difficult problems. For example, what they call the curves of dimensionality and the generalization problem. I'm just going to talk about them very quickly, but it's not just a matter of complexity, it's an enormous complexity, astronomically large numbers of parameters, trillions, as Poggio was saying. So what seems to make the operation of artificial intelligence so opaque to us epistemically is its complexity, but it's not just that. It seems, and I think it's an interesting quotation, deep network models often have far more parameters than the data to fit them, right? So there is a in a sense, the data are outnumbered by the parameters. And despite the mountains of data we produce these days, so big data, but even more parameters than the big data. And that's interesting. And this situation, the discussion continues, ought to lead to what is called overfitting. So too many categories what the information we have. Our current data fits the model well, but any new data fits the model terribly. However, the artificial system, as you can here, implicitly regularizes the solution. So there's the machine can cope, the artificial system can cope with this enormous amount of data, and even with this generalization puzzle, the overfitting, too many parameters for the data we have. And how do we deal with that? How much of a black box is it to us? Can we demystify this black box? Some people say yes, and there are methods to do that. But no matter how the methods get complicated, and here I give you some examples, they're basically all approximations. We never really get over this problem that we don't understand how these artificial capabilities succeed in doing what they do. So I think, my take on this matter is that at all these levels, starting from physical powers to emerging powers to artificial powers to deep learning powers, it's really the core of it is that all these are capabilities or powers, dispositions, and it is their transition to doing what they do that is epistemically not accessible to us. So I do not think, I chose this title because it's fun, it's really all hype, of course. I'm hoping you're thinking of BD, Brigitte Bardot, and she was certainly not all hype. And I would say that even my own BD, which is just a black box problem, is not all hype. Because we hit upon a robotic problem. If we human beings understand by classifications, and we cannot understand anymore the classifications as the artificial system can do them, then, and we cannot because we don't understand the basic fact of how to do what we do, then we have a limit to our comprehension of the world. And artificial intelligence, that does not make us understand better the world, it's worse, in fact. So I think there are people in the room or maybe online that know more about technicalities, but I think even if we manage to track what algorithms do through further algorithms, we will never be able to conceptualize it, to understand it. There's always be limitation. So how do we relate that? I think that we can we have been in a sort of belief, and by belief I mean justified through belief. So we have reasons to believe that powers can do what they do, and that is in the physical as well as the mental as well as in the artificial intelligence system. So we can have justified through belief that if that glass is fragile, it's going to break, and that an algorithm will do certain things. But I think the complexity of the developments of AI is taking us to a phase of fate. So we really have much less grip on how the artificial system powers do what they do we are now, as I say, in the position of faith. So this distinguishes what I think about physical powers and the powers of artificial systems. I think they're all black boxes to us, but with science, we are in the phase of belief, or in this justified to belief about what they do. At this level of complexity with artificial systems, we are, I think, already in the phase of faith. So we have less degree, but we still can believe that we can make predictions using that. So my conclusion is that we have to live with these black boxes. We live with them in nature, and that seems relatively okay to us. Even the human mind is, if we think like Grail, that's a set of capabilities, when the black box ones, artificial systems challenge us because they are black boxes, so that's a challenge we already have. But they are more complex, more difficult black boxes that do not fit our way of understanding the world. And so, I think we have reasons to accept them if we accept black boxes in science, but also reasons to recognize that we need perhaps even more epistemic humility about them, that really beyond what we can have justified belief in, and it's beginning to become a matter of faith with no theological or religious connotation here, but just that it's we place trust in them, and we find hard to justify why we do that. So this is all I want to say. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Anna, for your talk. We have now time for questions. Maurizio Tavares. Maurizio, maybe it's better to come here.
There is also an interesting implication on the discourse of black boxes and powers, because usually people say that either you explain by means of powers or you explain by means of black boxes. But in fact, suppose you open a black box. Can you explain the black box without the powers?
Yeah, that's an excellent comment. I agree. It seems that, well, that's something I was chatting with Erika about. So it seems that either one has a black box who has powers, but I say, well, as soon as we introduce powers, we do introduce black box, and if we try to open that black box, probably what we would find would be other powers, and then potentially it's a regressive, it's a regress of powers, and so we get no explanation. So yeah, I think you're highlighting one of the things I want to say, that it's not either black box or powers, because even powers are a black box, and even when we try to open that black box, what we might find is powers. So yeah, we're there, stuck there, but yeah, these powers I think are useful. The very fact that we build artificial systems is because we can put together these powers and predict that if put together in a certain way, we can certain functional capacities that the system will have. So I'm a friend of powers, and I'm hoping to convince you all that that black box is not such a bad thing. Thank you, Maurizio.
Filippo? Yes.
Fascinating. So my first question is about the metaphysics of powers. My metaphysics studies go back to Ferrari's courses back 20 years ago here at the University of Turin. So forgive me, this is a main question, but I'm struggling with your basic idea of defining powers as black box. So if you think that the point of metaphysical studies is identifying some certain basic features of nature, you may just say that when you reach powers, you have reached your goal. You have reached the first principles of nature. And so the fact that you call them black boxes seems to suggest that there's something wrong with that. Whereas you may say that this is precisely the goal of metaphysics. Whereas in design, a black box can be wrong because the logic of design needs to understand what you do because you were doing.
Yeah, no, that's good, Filippo. What I want to say, yes. So when we reach powers in our understanding nature, I think we do reach from boxes, and I think it's an epistemic black box. So you know, obviously there is something there, the dynamics of the force of the dynamics of power, but we have no tools conceptually to explain how this transition from inactive to active happens. So you know, I think you're right. So you're saying I think you are reporting on you in the right way. So I think you get rock bottom, you get powers, and we know exactly, maybe you know that it's rock bottom. But then how does rock bottom operates to metal? That we don't know.
Okay. And a quick follow-up on that. So the second question is kind of related to the concept of understanding and explanation, because I think you intentionally avoid the use of explanation in your talk, right? And you try to define understanding by classification.
Yes.
And this is a very controversial point
Yes.
in philosophy of the art, because I think the point is exactly that we want explanations, not only classification.
Yeah.
So how do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, yes, you're absolutely right. I subtly shot the kind of sheet to my book in the beginning. I was talking about explanations and I went into classifications. And that's something where I would like to do more work. So I do think, I think the next step is thinking. What I want to do is to see whether the explanation can be reduced to maximizing things before. And I do not know that there are good studies on that yet, but I think if a good study could be developed, I think that would really have to equate the booking back. So exactly what we understand when we generate explanations, so just when we classify what's different. So yeah, I think you have this brief what I want to say. I think my reaction is to say, I think the move I want to make is to reduce explanation and classification. If we can be done, anybody is running, I'm not using the research.
I know many people were against it. So they
Right,
have
right.
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very much.
Okay, the next question from Enzo. Yes.
So I think this was very, very interesting. I actually have two little points. The first one is about I was wondering about the connection between this discussion of black boxes and intelligence itself, right? So I don't think there's anything there's any serious tension between your discussion and the idea of attributing intelligence to black boxes, but I'm not sure. I mean, for instance, if you think about this Turing test, right? So it was meant to be operational, right? So I don't know anything about the underlying processes. Just get the outputs, and somehow the idea was right or wrong. I have that's one example of someone. And you have all kinds of cases, right? In a sense, you know, Dennett's intentional stance is another example of this attitude. So that's one thing. The other one is about the justified belief. So I might have missed something, but there's an analogy between your discussion there and like the scientific realism point, right? So if you go to these people, the anti-realists in science, they would tell you, sure, it's not justified. I mean, the belief about the underlying process is not justified. That's why they are anti-realists. But they would not say that you do not have a justified belief into the struggle conditions are concerned, right? So I was wondering how this matches with your.
That's good. Yeah, super. So I mean, obviously, the first point here is what intelligence is a very large one. But what I want to say here is that I think of intelligence, human mental institutions, and artificial intelligence all as institutions. So at some level, they all have something common, and that is this exercise of a certain ability to do something. So they do it. So I mean, in a sense, intelligence is no mystery if we think of it dispositionally, but then it is a mystery because we know what it is against the exercise. And that is, I think, super human intelligence, but also kind of one dispositions. And I think the direction of go to say more about the question would be what kind of, as I say, connect physical institutions to rise mental institutions with artificial institutions. And one person who's been working in this area is here in Australia. presenting the world. There's some crazy debate there, whether institutions have mental or physical intentionality, so I'm spreading away from that way. So, I'm sorry I can't say more about that, but I think I can tell you that. The second point is super interesting. So, I think that we can justify belief regarding certain pictures because we believe powers. I think we have justified belief that powers exist, and that is justified belief about fictions in the last hours. To me, the two come together, but you're right that someone really should say no.
Because you were mentioning faith at some point. So what is it that we only have faith?
I think what we have only faith for is the most complex artificial intelligence disposition we have made. And the reason why I think that's the matter of faith is that because we don't have the conceptual capacity anymore to really ground our predictions on anything about these things that are really valid. That's so beyond what we can comprehend ourselves. So I think that that's a leap between just by the belief and faith that they go beyond what we grounded on, and that's why we're faith. But that is the Bible. Maybe true even.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's thank again our speakers. Good morning and welcome to the second session of the philosophy of Derrida. Devoted to artificial versus natural intelligence. Our next speaker, I'm very happy that we have today Alessandra Sciutti from the Istituto Italiano di Tecnologia, who's going to talk about can robots help us understand our network. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, it would be better.
Okay. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure indeed. And yes, today I would like to, let's see if it works, to talk a bit about our take on intelligence. Just to give you a sense, I'm working at the University of Technology and the field of cognitive robotics. So we have a slightly different perspective from the speakers who presented before me. So usually when you think about intelligence, like the classical image that comes to mind is that of chess playing. But when we start thinking of, well, we want to create an agent that is intelligent, and these are the examples that come to mind. And if we look at what they can do, it's so much more similar to this. So they can reason, of course, but they can interact with the world, and they can interact with each other. And this is what we want, indeed, when we naively ask for intelligent robots most of the time. So let's see at which point we are in developing this. So from the side of AI, the advances have been great. And if we look at solving very complex logical tasks from chess first, then Go, then StarCraft, well, we have seen machines actually better than the best of us. But if we look also at what are the challenges now, we realize this, yes, we have very good machines able to solve specific, very complex tasks. But we are still far away from the child ability to learn from very little examples, to generalize over multiple tasks. A barrier that some people posit to the development of such type of intelligence is the inability of machines to actually interact with the world physically. But I don't know, I mean, if we look at the advances that nowadays there are in the field of robotics, bodyware, what the robots can do, well, I'm amazed to say that they are really like us, better than us. So it's a bit puzzling, if you want, to realize that we have very
intelligent, let's say, a sort of classic, a naive sense machines. We are very good machine at moving with physical intelligence, if you want. But still, when we face them with apparently or seemingly simple tasks, especially those that involve a little of social interaction, and they unexpectedly fail. So this has been already identified as a sort of paradox. Things, tasks that look so difficult to us as winning a chess game can be treatable from AI. But things that to us seem really literally a child's play, those are the difficult ones that we cannot copy in our machines. It's a so-called mode of experiment. But why is it so? We believe that the fault of this is actually us as humans. We give as granted that what we perceive, what we understand from the world, well, this is the real thing. But this is not what actually happens in our brain. What we see and what is actually there are two different things. Our brain is continuously enriching our perception. It fills the gaps. It uses previous knowledge that we have acquired during our life, during development, to stabilize our perception, to let us understand things which otherwise we would not fully understand. And it happens all the time, but we realize that it is happening only in those little cases in which the system fails. So when we are talking about illusions, there we notice that we are not saying what is there, but our brain is doing a lot of cosmetics on that. And this applies also at the cognitive level. We have a lot of cognitive biases. Again, we don't see the reality for what it is, but our brain cleverly selects what to attend to, potentially, to facilitate our efficiency, especially in a social world. A very paradigmatic example of our ability of using our experience to make sense or a deeper sense of what's happening in front of us is the example of the mirror system or the mirror unit. So in practice, we have areas in our brain that fire, that respond, both when we are performing an action and when we are observing someone else doing the same action. What this means is that we sort of have a vocabulary that depends on our previous experience that allows us to form a sort of direct match with what another person is doing, so as to be able to infer response or the future steps. And this implies that any action per se becomes a form of communication for us. So if you look at this picture here, well, what I have, the little robot sees, it's the movement of a human handing over an object. What we as humans see is not just that. We're not seeing a movement, we're seeing an action, which means that we're seeing the goal. Carlo has an intention to bring this toy to Icon. We see an attitude. Carlo is friendly toward Icon. He's quite happy with the situation. We notice even something about the nature of the object. It's a plush, it's not fragile. But we notice that Carlo cares about it because it's moving it in a careful manner. So in a glimpse, without even paying so much attention, we have realized a lot of information that was not there. I mean, for the machine, this is not there. But we use it continuously, and that allows us to predict, to adapt. And why is it so easy for us? Well, because we do that literally from the first hours of our life. If you look at the abilities and the skills that newborns have, well, we, since the first hours of our life, can detect if what moves in front of us is a living being or not. We can detect if someone is looking at us or looking elsewhere. And very soon, in the next few months of life, we develop a lot of these, if you want, social intelligence skills, starting from understanding pointing, and then anticipating the goal of an action, and even understanding when someone wants to do something, couldn't manage, and find a way to help them. It's called instrumental help. And we had these abilities even before completing our knowledge about language. So, of course, it's a very complex process. And it is based on our continual embodied interaction with the world and with others. Actually, we continuously exchange signals through our actions. You know something about me from the tone of my voice, from the way I'm moving my arms, from where I'm looking at. I'm sending all these signals. I'm not aware of them. Most of them I'm not even able to control. And I'm sending all of them together, and you're receiving all of them together. And your brain is using all of them to make sense of me and ideally predict what I'm gonna do next. Am I gonna ask you a question? So this is what happens in our brain continuously. And it's what makes us intelligent and socially intelligent. But it's very difficult to study this. And that's where we believe a robot might help. So it's true, robots are not yet the helpers, the friends in the picture that I showed before, but this doesn't mean they are useless. They could become an instrument for us to really investigate each and every signal. And the particular robot I'm showing is ICAP. ICAP is a humanoid, so it looks a bit like a human. And it's the result of a long, big, multidisciplinary European project. And it's slightly more than 12 years ago, it had the idea of creating a robot that mimicked the ability of children to learn. So trying to define which were the main hardware and cognitive abilities that the robot should have to be able to learn as a child does. And a key point here, so why you ask if it's a child? Exactly, because the idea was to understand a relatively simpler system, the child, which has, however, already all the necessary items that allow it to become a full-fledged human adult. And the project was actually very successful. Now there are more than 40 of these ICAPs all around the world in different research centers from Japan to US and all over Europe. And sharing open software approach. So the activities, the skills that are developed and investigated in one lab can be leveraged upon by other labs. So we're focusing mostly on human-robot interaction and mutual understanding. Others focus more on language. Others focus more on locomotion. And we all can share these abilities and advance our.
Right. So I come from the Netherlands. I'm Italian. I studied here in Torino, but I live in the Netherlands. And this is after lunchtime. It's already early afternoon. So I pretend I've already had a great lunch. And now we are starting the afternoon session. So my name is Filippo Santoni. I'm from Torino, actually. I studied here. And then I moved to the Netherlands, where I work at the Technical University Delft as a professor in philosophy, which is already something quite uncommon, I would say. And that's part of what I'm going to talk today. So this is what you see here is the view of Delft by Vermeer. So it's a very old picture, if you want, of Delft. And now if this would work, which it doesn't, I would show you the campus of Delft, which is not there anyway. So I will show you my track record. So my PhD was in the philosophical foundation of criminal responsibility, which is fancy title, Italian title, inspired by Circolo. And then I moved to applied ethics of technology since I moved to Delft. And then I must confess, I also written a book in the philosophy of football, but that's something that usually academics are not supposed to know. And that's the reason why I decided to write another book, because I thought it wouldn't show nice on my CV to have philosophy of football like my last book. So I'm working on a new book, which is gonna be on artificial intelligence and moral freedom. Why moral freedom? Because I'm a romantic guy, and actually my master thesis here in Torino was on free will and moral responsibility. And that's been a topic that has obsessed me for years, together with other people like Martin Luther and Erasmus and many other guys in the history of philosophy have been obsessed with the free will problem.
And what is interesting for now, getting to AI, is that free will has always been seen as threatened by other forces. And in the past, the big question, in the theological era, the big question was the compatibility of human free will and God, will and providence, you name it. And that was the big debate in theology. With the scientific revolution, the big question was the compatibility of free will with determinism or scientific explanations of the world, natural laws, you name it. And then most recently, the big threat to free will was considered to be advances in science, neurobiology, etc. Because if we can explain what's happening in our brain, then allegedly we're not free anymore or responsible anymore for what we're doing. So I see AI as the next step in this historical trend where we see something as a threat to our freedom. And so the big question is, to what extent can or is AI a potential threat to our moral freedom? Now I have to try to switch this, which is not, I know, but it doesn't go unless, should I be with a cursor on it? What should I do? Okay, I have to keep the cursor there. Okay, sounds good. So I have to put the cards on the table. And when I was studying free will, a big breakthrough in my studies was reading of Daniel Dennett's Elbow Room, which I believe is one of the best, in my personal opinion, one of the best books on free will. Because here Dennett is not relying so much on things for which he has become famous later, and philosophy of mind and consciousness, etc. He's more relying, I think, on his background in Oxford, studying with Jay and Austin, on language and conceptual clarity. So what Dennett is saying is, we are confused when we're talking free will. It's not clear what we're talking about. It's not clear what we want and what we just care about. And so he does a lot of interesting distinction. And I'm trying to summarize it to the best of my capacities. And what he's saying is, we don't want, when we are concerned about free will, we're not really concerned about what philosophers talk about. We don't really want this metaphysical capacity to act against the laws of nature or being able to do whatever at all times, no matter what the constraints are, etc., etc. This is randomness. It's not freedom, right? In the morally relevant sense. Could be freedom in some metaphysical sense, but from a moral point of view, this is not what we're looking for to ground moral values and principles like responsibility. So moral responsibility can exist also without free will in the strong metaphysical sense that has been debated by philosophers. And moral freedom can precisely depends not on being unconstrained in our actions, but on the way we are constrained, right? So this is where AI comes into the picture, because AI is a new way for us to interact with the world. We have always interacted with technology, with the world, with other people, but now there is this new way of interacting with each other and with the world. And this may change the way we are constrained. And this could be potentially a problem for moral freedom. So in this book project, I have identified 3 domains in which there can be what I call shifts of action. So what I'm suggesting is that AI is not gonna make us completely unfree or completely free, but it's definitely gonna change the way we act and interact with each other and with the world. And so I've identified 3 ways in which this could happen. And for each of these 3 ways, I'm saying how things can go wrong, how things should go, in my opinion, and what do we need from a conceptual point of view? What kind of concepts do we need in order to make this transition fruitful for moral freedom and not damaging for it? So the first concept is the concepts that I think we need to reflect on are the concepts of capabilities and capital. And the main field of the main domain of application is AI and robots for work. So there has been this big debate: are robots going to destroy many jobs that they're going to create, which is an old debate, but has been renewed because of the specific features of AI. And it seems that AI can actually make happen what has never happened so far and always feared, that namely that technology can really, the pace of development of technology can overcome the pace of development of the creation of new jobs, and we can have a massive unemployment, or at least a big decrease in the quality of the jobs available. And so the way I conceive of this, forgive me the pun, AI, BI, RI, this is a bit of a pun to identify 3 ways to look at this. So AI, of course, is artificial intelligence. And there are many books suggesting that we really need to be careful the way we implement AI, the way we design AI, the policies we have in introducing AI in the workspace because of risks of the worsening of quality and quantity of jobs available. Now, some people have said, okay, but we have an easy solution to, even in the worst case scenario in which most of us will remain unemployed, we can go to BI, which is basic income, which translates in Italian with reddito di cittadinanza, which is, by the way, not what we have now in Italy. It's quite different than what has been implemented in Italy under the same name. Anyway, in the literature, basic income is this idea that everybody, just because of existing and being in a place, whether they have a job or not, is unconditional, are own some money from the state, just to take care of their basic needs, right? Whatever you think about this idea, which I'm not discussing here, what I'm discussing here, whether this could be a good way to face a jobless future. Some people say, yeah, it's going to be fantastic, right? Because you don't have to job and you have the money, and so you can do whatever you want. So first of all, obviously, you're not going to get much money. So even in the worst case, the best case scenario, basic income is not going to be a lot of money. Anyway, but apart from that, it's interesting because Filippo van Parijs and others have suggested that basic income could really provide you with real freedom, as opposed to only the formal freedom that all the liberals were looking at, so absence of constraints. But you can have something to make your living with, which is probably true, and it's great. So I think there are a lot of merits to the idea of basic income. Now, question is basic income a sufficient, whatever you think about it, is it a sufficient answer to the big question of technological development and work? I think it's not. And the reason is that basic income is basically a post hoc intervention. You just let the technology go wherever it wants, which usually is wherever the big companies want it to go. And then you just give money to people who have been damaged by this development. And you hope that they will be free and happy anyway. And so it's a very thin conception of justice, if you want. It's a redistributive justice. You let things happen, and then you try to fix it. So the RI of my previous slide is actually a responsible innovation, which is something we are working on in my university and many other places. And this is at the ground of this idea of mixing philosophy and technology and engineering. So the idea that we should try, of course, we cannot predict, as Anna said this morning, we'll never be able to predict the development of the technology, but we can try and guide it and reflect on it and govern it in such a way that we achieve the goals that technology is supposed to achieve, which is making people's life better, everybody's life, and not only some people's life. So the RI of my scheme is responsible innovation. So what a responsible innovation approach suggests in relation to the big issue of AI and work is that we have to take these anticipatory social and technological policies where we try to design technology, interaction with technology in such a way that we take into account during the design and implementation phase the impact of technology on humanity, as opposed to let it go and then trying to fix it with some cash, right? So that's in a nutshell the idea. And what's behind this idea is a sort of a richer sense of justice that not only looks at the redistribution of some basic goods, but looks at indeed capabilities, capacities, functionings of people. In the background is, capability approach, if you want, Amartya Sen and others. More recently, Shannon Barrows' idea of technology and the virtues, using technology to cultivate certain capacities of humanity, as opposed just to try and fix what humans allegedly cannot do and complement that, but really using it for a meaningful development and flourishing of humanity. The second part, still related to the work part, has to do with the concept of capital. So I'm not an economist here. I don't want to brag and say I know things I don't. But I've done some work with a colleague of mine, and she wrote Astapad at Delft. And she has suggested that we might need a new concept of capital to make sense of the transition to AI. And here's some, so I got a paper on that, but this is the gist of the story in very simple terms. Whenever you use social networks or any AI-based technology, we're doing a lot of work, right? So think how much stuff well, I don't, but how much stuff people post on Facebook, upload videos on YouTube, etc., etc. And this work is not recognized as such, right? It doesn't show anywhere in the balance sheets of companies, and therefore it's not rewarded. It's not considered as part. It's a main drive of technology. So there's this myth of autonomy. Speaking of concepts, speaking of autonomous technology is a very dangerous misnomer. Technology is never autonomous because it's designed and always works in interaction with people. So it's never autonomous, again, in a metaphysical sense of operating without any constraints and interactions. And so it's very important to always recognize these interactions in the definition and the description of autonomy. So if we do recognize these from a philosophical or philosophical economic terms, we need to consider this as capital. So the mental abilities of people working with these technologies is what makes this technology really special. The reason why you use Facebook, YouTube, Airbnb, Uber, you name it, is because of the reviews, the materials that human people upload on that. This is what makes you trust the technology, not the quality of the algorithms in themselves. So we need to basically recognize this shift of capital, this hidden labor that we are doing in interacting with technology, and reconceptualize the whole system of how the benefits of this technology are distributed, the way we think about this technology, etc., if we want this to preserve our moral freedom, again, as the capacity, the recognition of our capacity to contribute meaningfully to something that is happening out there in the world. Second part of this project is control and moral responsibility in some more philosophical sense. Here we're getting closer to the free will sense. We want to be able to point to individual people and say, you did that and you did that. And technology such as AI may make this more difficult than in the past, or difficult in a different way. Maybe not more, but in a way for which we may not be prepared. So whenever you Google ethics and technology, the first thing you get is these moral dilemmas with self-driving cars. And I'm very grateful to people who have pushed this because they made our discipline famous. Now, when I say that the ethics of technology, people know what I'm doing. I get some more funding, so this is all great. But speaking of content, I think this is a bit of a distracting exercise. Taken literally, it has a lot of merits like many other philosophical thought experiments. It's just a continuation that shouldn't have happened. But that's me because I think I clicked on the, so now the video is starting, which was part of the original idea, but we don't have time for that. So how do I go back to the presentation? There you go. And this has also become the biggest social psychological experiment ever, the moral machine, where people are asked online to put their opinion. Anyway, what I'm more concerned is real cases of problems with the interaction with this autonomous technology in driving, for instance. And we already have had accidents showing that the big problem is not moral dilemmas with fully autonomous vehicle, but is interaction between humans and existing technologies. And so there was this famous fatal, the first fatal crash in which a pedestrian was killed in Arizona by a fully autonomous vehicle, which was not supposed to be fully autonomous. There was a person on board who didn't realize they were supposed to intervene, and so they ran over a lady who were not supposed to be walking in that dark area without walking on the pedestrian crossing, etc. So there was a big combination of mistakes on all sides, which led to what in the literature we call the responsibility gap, which is the second big topic I want to talk about today. So AI can create situations in which our common concepts of responsibility do not yet apply. And so we have a big issue in deciding who is responsible in many different ways. Who is to blame, which is usually what people are more interested in. So who is liable? Who has to pay for that when a car kills you without a driver? This is what lawyers and manufacturers are very interested in, because this is a real big issue from a legal point of view. And from a moral point of view, so this is who is to blame, and that's right. But responsibility is a richer concept again. And on top of blame and culpability, we have responsibility as accountability, which has more to do with the discussion we had on black box and transparency. because another big requirement we have is that someone is able to explain what happened. Even if you don't want to blame anybody, we just want to understand for many different reasons, to improve the system, to explain to the public and to the victims what happened, etc., etc. So this is a responsibility as accountability. And then we have other forms of, we have responsibility of public accountability. We want to be able to explain as a political level why we invested in a technology that has given these results, for instance. And what I find even more interesting and less explored in the philosophical literature is the forward-looking dimension of responsibility. Okay, this shit has happened, so to speak. But now, what now? Who is supposed to do what? Now, again, take the responsible innovation perspective to technology. Who's supposed to design the next technology? Who's supposed to take the obligation to improve the system and to make it work better? And to cultivate their capabilities and capacities to see to it that the next system is going to be better than this one. And this is what we call active responsibility. All of this sense of responsibility is under pressure because of the complexity, not only of the technology of AI, but of the socio-political economical system that is around it. And so what we proposed in another project is reflecting on the concept of control. So if you talk, when you are involved in these interdisciplinary projects, you talk to engineers, and you even have a full stream of studies in engineering, full discipline, which is control engineering. But what they mean by control is a very mechanistic sense of control. What in philosophy we would call a mechanistic sense of control. There's a loop to be closed, the system works, there's one controller, and as far as the system adapts to the behavior of the controller, the system is under control. If the system stops adapting with the behavior of the designated controller, the system is out of control. So this is a very narrow sense of control, one that doesn't allow us to understand the complexity of the social, moral, and political challenges we have. Because take the Tesla accident, not the Uber one. In the Tesla accident, there was this guy behind the driving wheel, and he was supposed to intervene. And the system was, in terms of the driving system, was working perfectly according to the design. What went wrong is that the guy didn't realize that he was supposed to do something, or he thought that the car would know better. And so he didn't intervene in time. He was checking his phone, watching a movie, apparently, or whatever, and the car crashed into another big object, a truck, and the guy died. Now, from a technical point of view, the system was under control. Because if the guy had intervened the way he was supposed to, according to the design, the accident would not have happened. But this is not the kind of control we want. We want to see to it that the guy knew what he was supposed to do, that the system was aligned to the real capacity of the guy, etc., etc. So this is what we call meaningful human control, which is one step beyond the technical meaning of control. And I think that this concept of meaningful human control is super important to make sense of the kind of interaction we have with technology, which is not like this, mechanistic, direct, one-to-one, but it's like that. So who is controlling this horse here? It's an interesting question, right? You would say it's the guy who's driving it, but maybe it's the guy who was training the horse, or maybe it's something that the horse has learned along the way, or maybe it's the audience that's screaming at the horse. Maybe it's the guy who has set up the Palio of Siena, who is eventually controlling everything because he has designed the whole thing, right? So this idea of who is really in control, who is meaningfully in control of some part of the system is a big philosophical question, not only a technical one. And we propose a very tentative definition of meaningful human control, trying to move from the alignment to the behavior of one designated controller to the alignment with the relevant reasons of the relevant agents in the systems, which is very open-ended definition, but allows to keep into account a relation that is based on at a more abstract level, not only the behavior, but the reasons, the intentions, the values that are out there in the system, and B, it allows to go beyond the idea that there is one controller in the system, but there are more controllers, both at the political level, social level. We can broaden it up as much as we want. And so the idea is that this richer conception of meaningful human control can help us design systems that avoids responsibility gaps, because we may be able to identify who's supposed to do what at different levels of design, development, control, use, regulation of the system, in a way that the old concept of control doesn't seem to be able to do. Last part of the presentation of the book project is human action and freedom in the political domain. I don't know if you've seen this Netflix show, The Social Dilemma, which tries to put a spotlight on the problems with the big social network platforms, Instagram, Facebook, and whatnot, which I think it does a decent job in covering one aspect of the story. It's very much focused on the addiction issues, the impact on adolescents' psychological development, et cetera, et cetera. What seems to be slightly missing in this is the political dimension, right? It is there at the end, the last 5 minutes are there anyway. So what I want to focus here is a bit more the political dimension of AI. And I think it's a very important dimension. So in the literature, we look at robots. In the philosophical literature, we have people presenting robots as tools, as slaves, as potential partners, friends, colleagues, collaborators. Whereas I think that the best way of framing robots and AI in general is as sociopolitical systems. After all, robots are connected and they interact, and they are basically systems of rules. So they're quite similar to political systems, to legal systems, because they are eventually determined by the set of rules and the norms of interactions that we design into them, or even if we don't design into them, that happen or emerge in their function. So the big question is political. What kind of set of rules we should design into the robots, and how can we make sure that we can control very much in a democratic way? If this is a set of rules, then we need democratic procedures similar to the ones we have to control legal systems, political systems, and whatnot. And indeed, we have seen that technological big techs controlling big AI platforms can do quite important political things. It's just a random selection of things big techs can do: influence political elections, facilitate a genocide like the Rohingya in Myanmar, silence the president of the United States overnight, switch off a continent, like Google say to Australia, say, we don't like your regulations. Okay, fair enough, we go away, and tomorrow you're left without all of the infrastructures you depend on. So, and in the philosophical literature, and I'm approaching to the end, so there's time for some questions and lunch, especially. In the literature, the most used and abused metaphor is the one of the panopticon, following Foucault, and Deleuze's idea of the societies of control. This idea that technology is eventually realizing what some philosophers and historians were fearing, which is this possibility of having this concentration of power in a central point, where the central point has complete transparency on anybody outside, and the other way around is not the case. And from the outside, you cannot see what's happening in this central point. So that was a metaphor that Foucault used way before AI and digital technologies, and it has become super popular these days because obviously it seems to capture very well what's happening, something that is happening with big tech. Now, the big question for us, who wants to change this, is whether we can think of a reversal of the panopticon. So this is the UN headquarters in New York, which in Italian, I just learned that only in Italy we call it the Palazzo di Vetro. So if you tell a non-Italian speaker, you know, the Crystal Palace or the glass, what are you talking about? They think of London, the Crystal Palace, the football team, and et cetera, but they don't call this, it's an Italian way. Anyways, what we call the Palazzo di Vetro, it's this, the idea behind this was exactly the opposite of the panopticon, that the power should be transparent to the citizens. And so the idea is, can we create this reversed panopticon and reverse the concept of control in such a way that control is not seen anymore as something to fear, because we think of being controlled as a power that we as citizens can use to control what's happening to us. And this comes mainly from political philosophy. The main reference here is Philip Pettit, idea of non-domination as key to liberal democracy. And the idea is precisely that a richer sense of freedom requires us to be able to control what the power does, to have tools to see and to understand and to interact in a effective way with the powers. Even if we don't have the power, we are able to control the power. And so again, trying to closing up the circle, if AI is a sort of a set of rules, is a form of central power like governments, like big companies, then what we need to do is design that technology and all of its attachments, as they are called in the sociology of technology, in such a way that they promote and not hinder the possibility for citizens to learn what the power is doing, to control the power, to resist to the power, etc., etc. So how do we do that? That's another game, right? I'm just a philosopher, but as a philosopher engaged with technology and as a possibly romantic guy, I do believe that a starting point is this idea of recreating a stronger collaboration between system engineering, philosophy, political economy, political philosophy, etc., etc., etc. So these are system problems that no individual discipline can solve. So in I'm kind of privileged to work in a department and a faculty in Delft that tries to do that. So it's quite an interesting experiment. It's called a Faculty of Technology, Policy and Management, and we have this section of philosophy. And these are the three big departments in the faculty that try to map the three dimensions of this big picture, which are engineering systems, multi-actor system or social systems, and normative reflection. So political theory, economical theory, philosophy, and law. So in a nutshell, this is a new chapter in the history of philosophy, I would say, and the history of interaction between free human action and the word, so to speak. And AI will play, whether we like it or not, quite a big role in these new interactions. So if you're interested in moral freedom, I think we should try and think to what extent we can design and think of AI as something that promotes, not destroy human capabilities, that rewards, it does not only exploit human capital, and it is embedding a new system of responsibilities. It also eventually at political level that transfer power from the central points to the people and not the other way around. So this is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much to Filippo, Santoni, and Lucia. We have come back with some questions. First, Anna, then Maurizio. Just raise your hand.
I was after Maurizio, but I'm sure Maurizio doesn't mind. We question. One of the key causes of is that which these interactive technologies with the guy on the car writing hard plays his role, the active not happen. But the because is that we can interact with technology, and that was my worry about robotics. So how that technology at some point becomes so incomprehensible to us that we can't go to pieces, and so we can't let that go.
Absolutely. So first of all, let me rephrase this. My intention was not to say that it was like the driver that was supposed to understand the technology. My proposal was that there should have been a better interaction. So either by having a driver or with a better training, or by having a technology that was more aligned with the real capacities of people, as we know that from psychological studies that clearly show that nobody is able to keep their attention with an honest system without doing anything for longer than 5 minutes or something. Anyway, so indeed, so I think I would bite the bullet and say that indeed we should not in critical domains like driving, transport, military, etc. We should simply not go for technology that is not relevant enough by the relevant people. That's part of the meaningful human control story. Either we train people or we train technology. If neither of the two is possible, we search for another solution. So I would say
Thank you. Makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I was really impressed by your presentation. I completely agree with most of your points. I have some slight difference on some details, which is you spoke about the controlling technology, but I think that it's impossible to control technology. What we can do is to rule technological company, what is known also for ecological purposes, make system of taxation that would be taxated, and it works for environment, and it can work also for the technology. Therefore, I believe that we can be able to measure, taxing, and redistributing the value, global value that humans produce. That, by the way, is produced by our free will. This because we are unpredictable as a frequent asset, and this is predictable. Is the real value for artificial intelligence. Just to point, don't underestimate the strength of politics, because you underline that Google was able to switch a continent. Don't forget that China was able to switch Google, and this would be an excellent example. And I'm not so sure on the issue of power. Not really so sure that it's a good choice. I'm also convinced that power should be intrinsically opaque. The transparency in the power can be an illusion or even a damage.
What do you mean? Sorry?
A damage, a risk.
All right. So thank you, Mario. It's a lot of interesting things. So I'll try to be brief, and then we can talk more possibly over lunch and dinner. So regulations. Yeah, that's a big question. What is more effective, ethics or law? Of course, law is more effective. Because the difference between ethics and law, as someone put it, is the stick. So the law can force you to do stuff that ethics cannot. But they are complementary. So I totally agree that we need better regulation. So apologies if this was not clear. This is a complementary thing. So the ethical cultural thing is not replacing the legal thing. It's supporting and promoting, because after all, in order to decide what are the good rules and good laws, you also need the philosophical ethical reflections. Also, I think that the law tends to, so it's not possible to cover by law everything. So of course you can regulate and tax and force companies and people to do a lot of stuff. But other things are more left to the cultural dimension, things of research. The fact that there is more investment in, let's say, black box AI as opposed to explainable AI is a political choice that you cannot dictate by law, but you can incentivize by granting fundings, policies, etc., etc. So I think we need both a stronger, definitely a stronger attitude in terms of legislation and regulation, but this is not enough. We should not be as naive as believing that if we force companies to pay more taxes, we'll be all right. That would be a good start for sure. But we also need the whole thing about the responsible innovation that I think I presented. Then indeed, governments in some places are even more powerful than companies. But is it something that we like? So that's a big question. So indeed, a colleague of mine tends to present these honoris when we had these two big models, you know, the state-controlled technology, for instance, in China, and the market-controlled technology in the US. And he said, personally, I don't like either of the two. So is there a possibility, for instance, in Europe to have a third way where we have a good mix of state control and market control of this? That's, I think, in going to the power, that's a very big question. I don't know how to answer. maybe what I can just say is, again, I'm not so naive as to, again, I don't want to have given the impression that I was thinking of some sort of direct democracy or something like that, which is not something I'm very fond of here. But I just believe that we need if we do believe in some basic principles of democracy, which I do, like these principles of mediation and control over the power, the whole idea of it is precisely that we don't have to keep the people the power. The power will always remain in the hands of the policymakers and legislators, but the people should have the power to control and to interact in the right way. So that's my sense of power as control, not a controlling as active, but being able to edit policies as opposed to design them. So that's also a metaphor that I uses.
Okay, so just like a follow-up, a couple of questions, but yeah, I think that's very interesting. We are talking about those topics, asymmetry to the economic governments. But I'm also thinking in another asymmetry between the countries that are making the development and the country that will be affected, because you said, and what I get interesting is responsible innovation, but the ones that have to be responsible innovation are certain countries, but the ones that are affected by responsible innovation are all the countries. So I'm sure that there should be some international rules or some agreements, or maybe you can say something like that. And then the other very things I found very interesting that they were taking the framework of the free world discussion for that topic. I think that's pretty nice. And my doubt is those examples can be useful for the traditional discussion in the world. So there is some papers in that line. And then the last thing, but you have to answer to everything, of course, is in that idea of the cultural responsibility design is relevant also how it works in your framework. That's all.
But I just missed the very last word. Design.
Yeah, because sometimes design may undermine the control. So you have certain control, the design previously done in the kind of the framework, how we see the screen, etc., can be relevant also.
Oh yeah, for sure. So what was the first question? Just give me one keyword. I forgot the first question. The global level. Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. No, thank you very much for raising that. I think this is badly missing in the presentation. So when I talk democracy and power, I use as the metaphor a Western country and the relation of power within a certain country. But I think you are totally right that the big challenge is at the global level, the democratization of the technological development. So, for instance, I've been involved in these policy discussions on automated vehicles and self-driving cars. And sometimes it's ridiculous the fact that we in Europe are discussing this level of detail of how technology can improve road safety in our super tech cities, where we know at the global level that I don't have the numbers here, but the vast majority of accidents and road fatalities happen in low and middle income countries where they lack the basic technology. So we're investing in technology is supposed to make this switch at the top of this distribution of accidents. So we're not looking at those, and this is just one example. I absolutely agree with you that should be a big dimension of the power and democracy story here. So thanks very much for raising that. And the free will thing, I will leave it for lunch because it's I think I don't have any energy for it. But thank you for that. I'm happy to discuss.
So one last question.
Yeah, I think most of it for lunch, but one is connected to what you just said as a reply. One sentence that you said at some point, about the accident in Arizona that hit, and you said that the drive, two options. One was the driver shouldn't have better training, and this applies also to the fact that the better training is not available always at our place. But specifically, the question has to do with how you justify a technology that in order to work trained for it, and how dangerous it would be when you adapt to a technology and not have technology that solves your own problems.
I'm 100% in agreement with you. As I said, Joanna, sorry if I gave the impression that I wanted to say that the solution is human training. I don't think this is the case. The solution is a better alignment, and then we have to consider also all costs of that. And I 100% agree that the first thing is, can we design a technology that adapts to us? That would be the best. As a second best, if it's not possible, we can also do a training. And driving is a field where we have to be trained anyway, right? So maybe it's a field in which is fairer to assume that we all have already the institutional organizational setup to do that. We just need to change some aspects of the training. But in general, I'm totally with you that the alignment the burden should not be on the user for many different reasons. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.